Slow down, lay your burden down.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 25 of Divergent Paths with Dan Dunford. I am Dan Dunford. Special midweek episode this week. The Pitch Black interview wasn't initially planned to be 2 parts, but there was so much good stuff that I couldn't just do one. So I spread that over 2 weeks, and as has become my monthly tradition, I still am putting out an interview in partnership with David Whitwell's Radical Brass series at Spectrum. So that's the reason for a special Thursday release. My talk is with John Clark, who is an incredible horn player, studio jazz, has been active in New York for a long time, been living in New York for a long time, and he was a really fascinating guy to talk to. Just a lot of cool stuff. So I hope you'll get into that. John was very, very nice and a really interesting guy. He's seen a lot of stuff and he's done a lot of stuff, and we were able to talk about it. His concert will be at Spectrum on Sunday, which is February 7th, 3 p.m. And Spectrum is at 121 Ludlow Street, number 2, if you have not been there before, so you should go check that out. Other than that, nothing much to report. Just listen to the interviews, like, subscribe, share, review, etc. So, I hope you enjoy my talk with John Clark. Oh, and a quick note before we get started. John was kind enough to give me a couple tracks that he's recorded over the years, and it's really cool what he did. The first track, which will come on before the interview, is entitled The Answer, Island Flower, and it's from John's very first solo album that he recorded back in 1978. It was released on LP, and he sent me over an MP3 of the track, and it's really cool. And at the end of the interview will be a little piece from the Odd Couple Quintet, which is one of John's ensembles, and the track is entitled MK447JC1. At least that's what it's titled on Spotify. And, well, I'm not going to expound on that one anymore, but you may recognize some of the melodies and the like in that one. So, enjoy the music, enjoy the interview, and I'll talk to you guys on Monday. Cool. So I've had a lot of, I've had a fair number of brass players which makes sense since I play trombone. But I haven't had any. It's been a lot of trumpet and trombone over the past 6 months. No solo horn players yet. So you're number one for me. when Dave Whitwell sent me, he was like, "Oh yeah, this guy John Clark, you should really look him up." I was like, oh, you know, that name's not ringing a bell really, but okay, yeah, of course. And then I looked up, you know, on Wikipedia and on your website, and I was like, why don't I know? Why is this guy not? Well, why haven't I heard of him? You know, like there's this like huge body of work. It's kind of a strange thing. I guess part of that comes from being in a music program that focuses solely on orchestral music, in a way.
Yeah, well, you know, I understand what you're saying, and this is something that I think about sometimes too, and I think a good part of it is coming from my end,
Mm-hmm.
and it's due to the fact that I've always I've been versatile and adaptable and able to fit into a lot of different situations, and that's a good thing in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a really good thing sometimes for making a living. And it's not such a good thing if you for any one thing that you do. Okay, like for instance, I'll give you a quick synopsis of my entire career.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I started on piano, then I played trumpet. My very first gig was on trumpet at age 12, and I was hired because I could improvise, and it was a kind of a rock band. And these kids knew a lot of tunes, but none of them could improvise.
Mm-hmm.
They could just play these pop tunes that we were hearing on the radio, but they needed something to make the tunes stretch out longer. So I was hired to just play incredibly long solos and woke up the next morning with my chops really swollen. Anyway, I said it was going to be a synopsis, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into each thing. I picked up the guitar, I picked up the bass, electric bass after that, and I've always been interested in so many different kinds of music and so many different scenes. I could never really make up my mind to be a horn player until, you know, like mid-20s, I guess. And at that point I was in a military band, and I kind of thought I would be an orchestral horn player and play jazz on the side. Then, when I started being an orchestral and a classical freelancer, I found I really didn't dig it that much. I said, no, this really isn't for me. I don't like wearing the tux and the tails and everything. So at a certain point, I completely stopped playing any kind of music that I had to read off of a piece of paper. I would only play music where I could improvise out of my head or with what was going on around me. And as far as studying, I mean, I guess I looked at lead sheets because jam sessions was a huge part of my learning experience. I didn't go to Berkeley, and there weren't that many. I was at NEC, so there weren't that many places like there are today where you could go and get a really comprehensive jazz education. So my education was pretty much just jamming here, picking up things by ear off of records and looking at lead sheets. So during that period, I just said, I'm going to be a jazz musician. That's all I want to do. I don't care about playing anything else. Then I started thinking more in terms of making a living. And I thought, how's it? Well, I was very, very lucky. I mean, I got in a couple of bands that were working, and I was incredibly lucky that I was able to make some kind of a living pretty much just playing jazz and a few freelance gigs and so on. Then at a certain point, the studio thing was kind of booming. I'm talking about the early 70s. And so I started getting those kind of gigs, and you can edit this part out if you want. But, you know, you get typecast when you're freelancing. Somebody sees you at an orchestral gig playing with the Brooklyn Philharmonic or whatever, and they go, oh, he's an orchestral player. We can't have him for this big band.
Right.
And if you do a downtown loft gig with Arthur Blythe or Oliver Lake or Julius Hemphill or one of those guys, are those names that you know?
They are not names that I personally know.
If you do stuff like that, people say, oh, he probably can't even read music.
Right.
You know what I mean? So as my studio work kind of escalated, I think I got shut out of other things. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I also was doing contemporary classical music. I was playing with Speculum Musicae and doing stuff for, modern composers. All right, that was a synopsis. Wait, I'm not done yet. I'm not done with the synopsis. That's taken us, only up to the 70s and 80s. Well, jumping ahead to the 90s, by this time, synthesizers were invented, and studio work very, very, very gradually just faded away. Mm. And so I started thinking, okay, what can I do? Do I want to be a Broadway sub again? Nah. But I don't hate playing classical music. Mm. So for a few years, I was pretty much working with the Woodwind Quintet, the Aspen Quintet that was traveling a lot and, mainly just traveling. So that was fun. I got to travel a lot. But it really took me away from the jazz music that I had already done. I had already recorded 3 solo albums at that point. And probably if I hadn't been doing this other work, I would have made a couple more albums or written more music or something. But that kind of work is demanding in terms of just having to practice and be able to play those pieces, plus the travel, the amount of time that's involved in the travel. So anyway, that ended. I was doing Broadway subs. I was teaching more for a while. And just fast forwarding really quickly to now, I would say this is my favorite part of my career right now, because I really have time to write music. I'm involved in more creative projects. I just finished a new album last year called the Odd Couple Quintet, and another album is in the can. In fact, I was working on mixing it earlier today with a no-net called 9 Live. This album I wrote all the music for, but I co-lead the group with a bass player named Dan Cooper, bass player, composer. And that record is going to be finished pretty soon, and hopefully the group is going to be pretty busy. Now, I went through that whole synopsis in response to your question about why you hadn't heard of me. So do you think that answers your question?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, and I don't, like, when I say, I haven't heard of a person, like that's nothing. I'm a 26-year-old freelance trombonist. So there are huge gaps in my knowledge. But I do find interesting is, when I talk to brass players who have been around, more than the past 15, maybe 15, 20 years, they, I'll ask them about, their career or their earlier career rather, and they'll like just lay out, name after name after name of these guys who are like, yeah, this guy was incredible. I love this guy. He was, top notch. And all these names in who played with this band or on this show or all this stuff. And it's just guys who were incredible players. They made their money and then they left, and they were great. And it's more of a I don't know. I think it in a weird way it speaks more to the the vastness of the musical. I hate using the word scene, but the vastness of the music. The brass playing scene in New York. It's just there's so many great players, and if you're not in this pocket or in this pocket, you're missing out on these musicians who are incredible, kind of a thing. That's I think, and so I'm always like super excited to talk to people about pockets of music or things that I just don't have as much knowledge about. So But I think I'd like to go back and touch on a few things. How are you from New York or?
I was born in Brooklyn, Bay Ridge.
I like it out there.
I do
It's
too.
kind of a hike from where I
Yeah.
live, but it's a weird thing. I'm kind of fascinated with, because so much of at least of Brooklyn is I don't know, it's
Being gentrified.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like it's a weird culture, and I go out there and I feel out of place. But if you go further out, you don't stop in Park Slope or
Right.
or Crown Heights or whatever.
Yeah.
You go a little further out, and you can get into a place where it feels like an old neighborhood. And those are the places that I like to be.
Actually, the neighborhood that we lived in, where my family lived when I was born, it looks exactly like it did when I was a little kid. It's kind of incredible. And yeah, you go out somewhere like that, and you go, oh, these are regular people.
Yeah, this feels like the kind of old school New York that I've read about or have have seen, in novels from that time or from movies of that time.
Yeah, but Manhattan even, and of course the nearer parts of Brooklyn, they change so much. It's like it changes week by week.
Do you feel like do you ever feel kind of like you mentioned how quickly it changes, and you've been here your whole life. Do you sometimes feel out of place in like in a city that has just rapidly changed around you, even though it's your home?
I don't know about out of place, but freaked out. Like if I go to a neighborhood that I haven't been in a year or two, and I look around and I go, wait a minute. Is this still Queens? It's kind of unsettling. I
What
guess.
happened to Sunnyside? I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, like for instance, my son lives in Chinatown, and he's lived there maybe 15 years now, and it's almost unrecognizable because it's gotten so gentrified, and there's a designer coffee shop on every corner now, and you don't even see that many Chinese people sometimes. I'm exaggerating, of course, but that's really, really changed a lot. Every time I go down there, I think, wow, is this the same block?
One thing I've only lived here for about 6 years, but I would assume that Chinatown will remain Chinatown as long as you can still smell fish. But so were your parents musicians, or was it a musical household, or
See the guy there at the organ?
I do.
That's my grandfather.
Okay.
My grandfather was an organist at a church in Brooklyn, choir director, piano teacher, etc. In fact, he started me on piano. But he was the only musician in the family, so I didn't really grow up except for him giving me piano lessons, most of my music came from the AM radio and whatever I could hear around me. The schools I went to had terrible, terrible music programs. So it was just like, what I could pick up on my own.
You mentioned like music around you. What kind of music was?
Rock and roll. Yeah.
I mean, you briefly mentioned that your first gig was on trumpet when you were 12, and you got it because you could improvise.
Yeah.
That seems, at least in current musical culture, that seems pretty early to be improvising.
I'm not saying this to brag at all, but my tendency is to just always want to improvise, no matter if I'm doing music or anything else. I mean, supposing I'm washing the dishes, it's my tendency is to go, oh, what if I wash it with this instead of that? What would happen if I used a little more soap? Or, you know what I mean? always experimenting, to see what would happen. I got myself kicked out of the orchestra when I was in high school because Well, it was so terrible. Anyway, I would always improvise on the parts. I couldn't stand to just like play footballs over and over and over, and I would just put in a different note or play a little lick or something. Stop that. So, yeah, that's it. It was just like it's an innate tendency to always want to improvise. And in jazz, that's encouraged.
Of course.
If you're playing in a big band and you see a row of notes and you all of a sudden you want to phrase one a little bit differently, that's encouraged. In the Philharmonic, it's not encouraged.
Maybe not.
Yeah. So
well, it's I've had interesting conversations with people about like the idea of improvisation and classical music, because before 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, we're talking about, you're playing, you're playing the same piece maybe, regularly.
Yeah.
But depending on the orchestra, depending on the conductor, depending on the musicians, improvisation was more encouraged, at least music, as far as musical interpretations, maybe not as much with the physical notes themselves. And then in the 20th century, it became with the emphasis on these urtext editions no, we need to play it. This is the traditional way to play it, and we have to stay in line with that tradition. And now even full orchestras, there are differences. There's always differences, but it's getting harder. It's getting harder to even make distinctions between different orchestras playing the same piece.
And the same thing is happening in jazz too. Oh no, we have to play this exactly the way the Fletcher Henderson band played it in 1939. No, you can't play it that way.
Yeah.
And that's good in a way. I mean, it's great to have groups that are like archives. What do you call it? Museums.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun. It's great.
There's a very specific jazz orchestra in New York that is very is.
We won't mention their name.
We won't mention their names, but I think it's probably pretty obvious. But that is very concerned with reproducing things in a traditional fashion.
Yeah.
And certain people that I know take every chance they get to rail against that. I probably wouldn't go as extreme, and that's I think if you want to do it that way, that's you have a right to do it that way.
I think it's awesome. I think it's great that someone's doing that, but that's not all there is.
Yeah,
that's all.
And I think that's where the problem comes up, is when people say that this is the only way to do it. As with any kind of music, if you're saying that this is the only way to do it, you're kind of closing yourself off.
Yeah. Can I? You didn't ask me a question about this, but I want to say this anyway. In the music that I write, especially more recently, I've written a lot of different things. I started writing just tunes for my jazz quintet or quartet or whatever, but lately I've been writing more like small chamber orchestra, chamber ensembles, groups that are kind of both. That are like has a jazz rhythm section, and then has a string trio and wind trio. So when I write this music, I don't always put a lot of direction in terms of articulation and dynamics, and I get a lot of criticism, even from the composers that are kind of in the same scene that I'm involved in. John, you should really let these people know how you want them to play it. Well, I'm going to go on record right here, and thank you for the opportunity to do it, as saying that I really don't like to do that, because I like the players to feel that they can interpret. Okay? Let me give you an example. Gunther Schiller's music.
Right.
Have you played Gunther's brass quintet?
No, I mean, I've seen it. I know what it,
You have to, and he was such a genius, and I love and admire him forever, but I wouldn't put that much direction in a piece, and I don't like to play it that way. I mean, it's brilliant, and I admire everyone that plays it and listens to it and everything, but I don't like to play it because I feel like it's so constricting, and I like to play where, okay, I want to play this note different than the way I did last night. That's what I like.
Going on with the brass quintet analogy, Manhattan Brass Quintet with, Dave Taylor, and of course Lou Soloff was in there before he passed, and RJ and those guys. I remember seeing them play, and it's a brass quintet. That's a very standard instrumentation. It's been around for a while, and there's a lot of pieces that get played over and over for that, for that setup. And hearing them talk about Bach in particular, when them talk about Bach, and if you go back and look at Bach's music, if you look at the original editions, not manuscripts, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, you don't look at these editions that have been re-edited and re-edited and re-edited. Uh-huh. You go back and look, and it's just
notes.
It's blank. There's barely any phrasing.
Just notes.
There's no dynamics. And
yeah,
and they, this quintet was, the quintet was bringing this up as a way to say, yeah, we want to play it differently every night. We want to provide audiences with a new experience every time we play. But the issue with that is, I think, I don't know if I'm not a composer. So I can only say what I think might be. But I think you have to trust your musicians so much. If you're going to do that, you have to be able to trust your musicians. Mm-hmm. And if you're not in a position where you think you can, well, I guess you would feel that you would have to do something like that. But if you're in a situation where you trust your musicians to make good and beautiful musical decisions every single time they play it, well then, why would you don't need that as much. You don't really need that as much,
right?
Or if you're
yeah.
But that's just something.
Well, in an ideal world, your musicians would learn after the first couple of times they play a certain piece. If you hear them do something that you don't like, you could just say, "Hey, don't do it like that. Try to do it a little bit like this." Mm-hmm. Okay, and I've heard that from leaders that I've worked with myself, and okay, sure, fine. It's your band, it's your music. I'm going to play it, but while still having a certain amount of leeway. Problem is, we don't live in an ideal world, of course.
Right.
And the way things are right now, so often you get called for a gig, somebody sends you a bunch of MP3s and PDFs, and you have to do half of the rehearsing at home by yourself. You get to a rehearsal and you run over stuff, and then there's one concert and it's over. Mm-hmm. It's really a shame, and I just admire everybody that keeps doing it, because it's so difficult. It's really difficult. So that's a reason probably to put more direction in your music, so that it comes out the way you want it. I still resist because I keep thinking, it's not always going to be like this. Someday we'll be able to play this for 2 nights in a row.
Well, say that things go in cycles, so,
I hope so. I just had
hopefully it cycles back around.
I had a great experience the last 2 nights playing brass quintet with tenor sax and drums by a composer named Quinson Knockoff. Mm-hmm. Knockoff. That doesn't sound... Anyway, Knockoff, I'll call him. Quinson. He's brilliant. A great tenor player, and the music is very, very challenging, but we had never played it 2 nights in a row before. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the second night was, this is different. It's really different. And I remember back in the day when I was starting out, almost every gig that I did was more than 1 night. There were certain concerts that were rare. There was only 1 night or 2 nights, but a lot of the bands that I worked with would play a week in one place, or 2 weeks in one place in a club in New York. And there was a lot of leeway in trying things out, experimenting with different ways of playing stuff. And of course there were tours, which we just don't have now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really a shame. But when you go out with a band for 6 weeks and you're playing pretty much the same music every night with some variations, things really develop.
And it seems most of the tours that exist now are either union or non-union Broadway Broadway tours, and that's not a situation. But yeah, it's not really a situation. Yeah, I mean, sure, things develop and get better, but it's not. Yeah. It does have to be the same every night. That is the pinnacle goal, is for it to be exactly perfectly the same every night.
Right. Right.
So, one thing I do want to, before we kind of get into the more nitty gritty of the playing stuff, you mentioned you were a service band guy.
Yeah.
Speaking of wanting it to be the same all the time.
I was this close to being drafted into the Army and sent to Vietnam.
Okay.
And it looked like I was going to have to do it for a minute. But a friend called me up out of the blue, and I hadn't even been playing the horn hardly at all for a while. But I knew him from playing together, and he knew that I could play the horn. He said, "Listen, John, you probably wouldn't be interested in this at all, but I just found out that they have an opening for a horn player in the Coast Guard band in New London." And I called up the next day, and I was in the Coast Guard a week later. So that probably saved my life.
Yeah.
But
play horn in the Coast Guard, or
I played horn in the Coast Guard band for 4 years. And that actually, was good. I did a lot of studying, and I was surrounded by guys that had been to various music schools, and we formed little groups, and I also played jazz. There was a big band there, and I played guitar in that big band for a while. So, I had some good experiences then, but mainly I decided that I did want to play the horn. I found that it's such a basic elementary thing. And it came to me one day when we were outside in the really hot sun playing for some ceremony, playing marches, playing like really stupid. Playing marches. Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Souza. But, after you've played one march like 3,000 times,
call it stupid.
Anyway, it just occurred to me that I really, really love the experience of buzzing my lips and blowing air through this thing and hearing a sound come out the other end. It's just that basic. And it's not about the sound, and it's not being attracted to the curviness of the tubing or the fact that you push. It's just that process that I really like. So,
well, when I was, I don't know, I had been playing trombone 3-4 years maybe. It was middle school, and for a while I was studying with. I was living in Virginia, and I was taking private lessons with a guy who taught at the Navy School of Music in Little Creek, and I was struck by the fact that the thing is with some of the military bands, like outside of the top, like the symphony, quote unquote, the symphonies of the services.
Yeah.
Like you can join those pretty easily. Sometimes it's people coming out of high school who play or like not sure what to do, but you can really get the chance, because it's pretty much a 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. job. You can really take the time to work on things and figure out what, you're getting paid to play music, but it also offers you, even if you only do it for a few years, it really offers you the opportunity to really put in time and really work. Because even
absolutely,
these guys, kind of similar to what you're saying, these really great musicians who are teaching at like a military school of music, like really great musicians, and you're never going to hear their names again, and they teach these guys, and it's really good. Military music is an interesting. It's
an oxymoron.
It's kind of a weird thing that exists. I was in the military myself for a little bit. I wasn't not as a musician, but
Uh-huh.
that was a weird thing where I didn't want to allow myself the easy way out. I was like, I'm gonna be in the military. I'm not gonna.
Okay.
I'm a musician. I don't.
I
I
admire
want to do
that.
something different.
Yeah. Sometimes when I think back, I think, when I was in the Coast Guard, I was always really happy about the fact that I was in the one branch that was about saving people rather than killing them. Okay. But sometimes when I think back, it would have been really fun to actually be in the Coast Guard and, go out on an icebreaker to the North Atlantic and save people's lives and stuff like that. But I love music. That's all.
Yeah. So there's a kind of an obvious thing to address here. The fact that you play horn and play jazz, which is a very small niche of the horn playing community. Remember reading a quote from the horn patriarch, if you will, Phil Farkas, saying that a horn, because he very against horns playing jazz, but he said something like a horn playing jazz is like an old lady trying to do the Charleston.
Oh my God! I never heard that.
I read it when I read it in an interview when I was in high school, and I thought that was hilarious, and I subsequently decided to use that to make fun, to tease my horn playing friends. Of course, it wasn't something that I necessarily believed, but it's just a fun thing to poke people with.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of people in the world who believe that the horn has no business in jazz and it should be banned or outlawed or something. And they're entitled to their opinion.
But that is the jazz and studio circles is kind of where you really made your mark, if you will. I don't know, where jazz, new music.
I guess you could say that. And yeah.
Well,
this makes me go back all the way to your original question, why you had never heard of me. And in the back of my mind, this was percolating, and I'm thinking, if I had really stayed with one scene and it never, deviated back to classical music or never accepted any gigs on Broadway or anything like that, maybe you would have heard of me. Maybe and that's something I would encourage younger people to do, actually, to stick with something rather than always jumping from one scene, because in New York there are so many scenes. Even within the jazz scene, there's the Brooklyn jazz scene, and there's this and so on. But I always just really I enjoy diversity, variety, new challenges all the time.
So just from a very basic, kind of point of view, like what kind of challenges are there, but also what challenges are there using playing jazz horn, and what ways do you kind of subvert those perceived negatives into something that creates something really interesting?
One huge disadvantage is just being heard. If you're playing in a big band and there are 5 saxophones, 5 trumpets, and 5 bones, it's pretty hard to drown them out.
Especially when your bell's facing to the back of the band.
Yeah. And for a while I used something that has a bell facing front. That's a thing called a hornet that I kind of invented. I don't play it anymore.
I'll have to take a picture of that and put it up, because that's really interesting.
I haven't played it in a long time. The problem is that's just a prototype that was put together with junk parts, and it doesn't play very well. But okay, so that's one way you can get around it, or you can get one of those what they call a marching mellophone or something like that. I don't like that anymore. Another way is amplifying yourself, with a wireless mic or a wired mic. See the little amp there behind you, the lunchbox amp? Sometimes I actually take that to gigs and put it behind me, not to reach the audience, but just to reinforce my own sound a little bit so that I won't push too hard.
Yeah.
Okay, so that I can hear myself no matter what else. Even if the drums are right next to me, I can still hear myself really well. So that's kind of a huge problem. And it's, like I said, with a big band, it's a bigger problem. If you're doing a trio gig with a bass player and a guitar player, it's not that much of a problem.
Right.
You know, even if there's, even if you're in a quintet and a saxophone is the other, you got a rhythm section, tenor and horn, it's not a problem, really. The more sound you put into the equation, the more the horn is at a little bit of a disadvantage. The advantage, in my opinion, is the horn just has such a beautiful sound that so many people are so attracted to. Oh, I just love the sound of the French horn. It's my favorite instrument, and so on. And it really is.
Well, and in a jazz context, there are no other instruments that have that kind of timbre. Like it's you might have 4 different saxophones, but on a bass level, it's just variations on the same kind of sound.
Yeah.
And the same thing with trombone or trumpet.
So to a lot of people, those people who say, oh, the horn has no business playing jazz, I think part of that is just lack of familiarity, because all the jazz that they've heard has been from the wind instruments have always been saxophones, trumpets, or trombones, and they think, oh, that doesn't belong there. It's because they never heard it before. Yeah. Okay. So to me, that's an advantage in a way, that the horn just has this unique sound. In another area, there's the whole technique issue. The horn has always the horn used to be thought of as an instrument that you had to make allowances for. Oh, he's going to cack a bunch of notes because that's the horn, and that's what they do.
Partials are too close, and then it's gonna be.
Yeah, well, that's not true anymore.
Right.
I mean, the bar has been raised so high, it's just like it's ridiculous. But in the classical scene, you know what I mean. You just aren't expected to ever miss notes, which is great. But but in jazz, of course, we can miss a note now and then, and you do, because that's not what it's all about. If you're improvising, you're constantly reaching for something that you can't quite articulate. You're hearing music in your head, and you're going, yeah, I want to play this. Well, it's not going to come out perfect because you didn't practice it for 4 hours already. You just thought of it 1 second ago, and now you're playing it. That's what's beautiful and exciting, and what I love about it. But that's a little bit of a disadvantage in a way, that just tone production is more challenging than it is on a piano or a guitar or a saxophone. Just producing a tone takes more effort. On the other hand, you have a lot wider range than a lot of instruments.
Yeah.
You pretty much have 5 octaves you can deal with.
Yeah, like a tenor sax is a very defined range, and some guys might stretch that a little bit.
Yeah.
Same thing with trombone, but
trumpet even more so.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, but the horn, from the bottom and below the bass clef all the way up to to trumpet range.
Yeah.
You got the whole thing.
When I'll tell you a funny thing that Dave Taylor used to do sometimes. We'd be in the studio, and I'd be warming up, and my warm-ups always involve, covering a lot of my range, including low. Mm-hmm. So I'd be playing something low, and he'd say, "Hey, stop that. They'll think it's me."
Sounds like him. I do that. I say similar things just to tenor trombone players who are like getting in on my territory, because I predominantly do bass trombone. I do tenor gigs here and there, but when we're warming up and they'll be like playing, low pedal notes, I'm like, yeah, get off my corner. they're gonna think those tenor pedals are the bass player.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
So those are the challenges. I mean, there's technical challenges, there's being heard, and there's overcoming people's prejudice of what they want to hear.
Well, yeah, it's easy to slot, with a trumpet player. There's been so many great jazz trumpet players, and there's been so many great jazz trombone players, but you can't, to model, even like as a young musician, to model yourself after. Like, if you're as a trombone player, I can, if I'm practicing my small bore stuff and doing some things, I can listen to Slide Hampton, I can listen to J.J. Johnson, I can listen to this. But if I'm a horn player,
who do you listen to?
That is
that is a slight disadvantage in one sense. That who do you listen to? When I was really starting to get serious about this, I listened to a lot of Willie Ruff, Julius Watkins, David Amram. That's all there was.
Right.
There was no one else to listen to. So Julius, I like the way he played a lot. And Willie Ruff is still amazing. David kind of, when he became more of a composer, he kind of left the horn somewhat behind, although he still can play the horn. It's pretty amazing at age 85 what he can do with the French horn without ever practicing, I think. But so why that's an advantage is it's all open.
Yeah.
You're not restricted at all by thinking, oh well, I probably should play a little bit like this. It's very wide open, and it's a disadvantage in a way that you don't know what to do. So how I solve that problem is I just mainly listen to saxophone players and trumpet players and trombone players. During the period when I was doing a lot of transcribing, I just fell in love with Lee Morgan, and I sat and transcribed Lee Morgan solo and Woody Shaw solos and Curtis Fuller, because Curtis Fuller to me is, although J.J. Johnson and Slide Hampton, I absolutely worship him as a musician, a player, and arranger. But Curtis to me has the most unique sound.
Yeah.
And I think of him, and I think of Lee Morgan when I think, I want to make my sound so unique. That's something that no one can teach you, and I don't know how to do it, And
I would imagine, and you can kind of sidestep some issues, whereas let's say a trumpet player's a 22-year-old trumpet player, you're not only are you fighting to like play well and play musically, but you're also fighting against something where someone might hear you play and it's like, oh yeah, you're just playing like so and so, or you're just playing like so and so, or you're just playing like so and so. I mean, like I would imagine that you can't, of course you can't just copy whoever, but you can I would imagine that a horn player could sidestep some of that, because 90% of the people who you're going to be playing for aren't going to have the knowledge of the guys you mentioned.
Yeah, right. I'll tell you a funny quote from Phil Woods. May he rest in peace. Somebody came up to Phil Woods once in a club, and I had to listen to a set, and they said, "Man, you sound okay, but you're just playing bird. You're just playing bird licks." And Phil took his horn in hand to the guy and said, "Here, let's see you do it."
Yeah.
So, but actually Phil, he did play a lot like Bird, but then he really had his own sound, in my opinion, and maybe didn't break a lot of new ground, but had his own thing to say.
Right.
I had a guitar player friend who was so into Jimi Hendrix. He said, "Man, I stopped listening to Jimi Hendrix completely because I knew that I would just wind up being a clone of Jimi Hendrix." And I thought, what would be so bad about that?
Well, that's a lot of something I bring up a lot when I'm talking to people is I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy. Just across the board. I love listening to a lot of different guys and women, and in my podcast listening, there are some really great interview podcasts that are hosted by comedians, and one of them, the guy says, this guy named Pete Holmes, he will say, if I'm working on, I can't listen to my favorite comedians when I'm working on new material, because if I do that, I automatically will start talking in their voice, or I'll start constructing my jokes in the same way, and that's an interesting. So I have to, in your early career, sure, you try on your heroes, if you will, but as you develop your own voice, you kind of, while listening to certain things, you have to, in some ways, leave that behind so you can develop a unique
I think
way of approaching things.
I think that's the natural course of events. If you continue doing what you're doing, that's going to happen automatically. And if it doesn't happen, well, that's sad. But I don't think you should avoid listening to someone or trying to emulate them. Or I don't think you should.
Right.
I think you should just hear it, and if you feel like transcribing a Lee Morgan solo and playing it exactly as he did, more power to you, because you're not going to stay there.
Right.
You're not going to just keep doing that the rest of your life. And if you do, well, it's sad.
So let's you have you have a company, I guess. Yeah. Organization.
I have
small business.
Actually, it's small business.
Small business.
Record label, publishing company, etc.
All under the all.
Doesn't everybody?
That's the nice thing about now. It's gotten more difficult to be heard.
Yeah.
But it's gotten a lot easier to create your own thing. I mean, I'm an example of that. Here I am with, putting this up on iTunes every week,
Absolutely.
But you have this thing called Hidden Meaning Music. Mm-hmm. So what's kind of the origin or what's the meaning behind the Hidden Meaning Music?
Okay. First of all, the origin came when I did my first solo recording in 1978. It's still available on vinyl and reissued on CD.
Oh, nice.
As of 2 years ago. I wanted to make my first recording completely was self-produced. Mm-hmm. I didn't want anyone to give me any input at all, because I just wanted it to be completely me. So that's why I did it that way. It was completely self-financed. And the guys that I hired for my rhythm section, I paid them a kind of a minimal upfront fee and then a percentage for several years after that. And it worked really well for everyone. So, but I had to have a company, and that's where Hidden Meaning Music came from. Mm-hmm. And I still have it. I have an online store where I can sell downloads, sheet music, CDs, etc. Mm-hmm. So... and the name Hidden Meaning Music, why I didn't call it John Clark's online store. Hidden Meaning is a quote from my religion, which is the Baha'i faith.
Okay.
I've been a Baha'i for quite a few years, since 1971. And when I had to think of a name for my company, I guess there's something about putting my name up on a billboard that I'm just a little bit reticent about. You know what I mean? So I wanted to find a different name, and I had just been reading in one of the Baha'i writings. There's no Bible or anything like that, just a lot of different selections of writings. And I read this thing that says, and I'm not quoting exactly, it encourages you to explore these writings and study them, meditate on them, and look for the hidden meaning. Mm-hmm. So I found it so intriguing that there's hidden meaning in everything to me. If you go out in the world and just look around you, there's stuff that's real obvious, and there's stuff that's not so obvious. And there's hidden meaning everywhere. Mm-hmm. So that's the name. Okay. You look puzzled, though.
No, I've just, I'm just a little intrigued. I think I'm from a, I don't necessarily subscribe to it as, so much anymore, but my background is very much, your traditional Protestant. Uh-huh. And I'm not, I'm not familiar with Baha'i at all. Mm-hmm. And I'm just kind of curious as to what that entails a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, that's kind of like, it's part of the reason I don't have like structured questions that I send to my the people I talk to is because I'm always interested in what comes up organically.
Yeah.
And like this is
I
the
love
perfect
it.
example of that.
I love it. I love it. Okay, I'll give you just a quick synopsis. The Baha'i faith was came into existence in 1844, and the prophet that we consider the prophet of the Baha'i faith is Baha'u'llah. He was born in a Muslim family in what is now Iran, and at a certain point, he declared that he is the next prophet in a long line of prophets. So one of the principles of the Baha'i faith is what we call progressive revelation, which says that all the religions are the same. The spiritual teachings of all the religions, beginning with Adam, Moses, Zoroaster, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, Jesus, Baha'u'llah is just the most recent one. And he even says within 1,000 years or something like that, there'll be another one. And progressive revelations means humanity needs a certain message at a certain time. And then at a certain time, it expires. It gets to the software has to be updated. And what's really unfortunate when you look around you now and you see people killing each other over religion, it's not really over religion. It's about power.
Yeah.
It's about politics, money, power, and wanting things to stay the same. Okay? The essence of what any prophet ever taught, including Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, and going all the way back, the essential principle of every religion is harmony, peace, love, and bringing people together, not divisiveness. One quote that I love from Baha'u'llah is, he said, if religion is ever the cause of divisiveness, it's better not to have religion.
That's an interesting point to make, considering, you bring up that when you have these huge wars over religion, it's more about power, and you go back through the centuries and look at how many wars have been fought over just minor differences within the same religion, even Catholicism versus Protestantism, or Islam versus Christianity. Of course, it's a little more divisive, but even the 2000, here we are in 2016, and it's still so what as musicians, everything about a person influences their music, and how do you implement this?
How does being a Baha'i influence my music?
How does being Baha'i influence your music?
Wow.
I mean, obviously, you have the name. Your hidden meaning music. Is drawn directly from something that comes out of that faith. But
actually, several things that I've written have been melodies based on prayers or other extracts of text that I took from a Baha'i writing. That's one way. And so some of the melodies that I've written, that I've come up with, I think have been really unique. Melody writing, to me, is one of the hardest things about composing. For me, reharmonizing something or orchestrating something is easy compared to, and I don't mean it's easy, but I mean compared to coming up with a really credible melody is, to me, the most difficult thing. So having lyrics or words or sacred text, if you will, it's just like it's a tool to coming up with a melody. And so the ones that I've used like in that way, I think are unique. I'm not saying that makes them good or anything, but they're certainly unique and different from what I would write if I was trying to write a pop tune for Celine Dion, right? It would be different.
Right.
And I've written some melodies that I like that were just completely melodies, not based on anything. So, but it's really difficult. But I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but when I first became a Baha'i, I grew up also in a Christian background, Catholic, but I had already lapsed, for many years. And I was I guess I was seeking in a way. I was, doing yoga and meditating and trying to learn this and that. And I felt like there was something out there that I wanted to know about, and I didn't know what it was yet. When I ran into some Baha'is and learned a little bit about it, I went to the library, took out books and started reading. And I said, oh, well, I believe this. I believe in the equality of men and women. I believe in elimination of prejudice of all kinds. I believe in elimination of war. I believe in establishment of a universal language for the planet. Mm-hmm. There's more like that. Mm-hmm. These are what they call the social principles. So anyway, I said, I believe this. I mean, I need to become part of this. Mm-hmm. So then it coincided with my break from classical music to deciding that I really am going to be a jazz musician now. That was a little bit tough in many ways because I already had a family. I had 2 little kids and a wife who were kind of depending on me to put food on the table. So I was really rejecting opportunities to have a stable existence. And somehow reading some of the Baha'i writings and texts referring to the arts and music made me realize, or helped me to realize, that this was a valid thing to do. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's not like I used religion to justify running off and becoming a junkie and, just going to jam sessions down in the East Village and not making a living. But it helped me to see this is a worthy thing to do. I think that's the best answer.
All right.
That answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So let's as we kind of start to wrap up a little bit, mm-hmm. So let's, some of these more recent projects and maybe a little bit about this concert coming up. Mm-hmm. This is number 5. This is the fifth podcast that's part of Whitwell's Radical Brass.
Right.
David was the very first interview I did.
Okay.
And he brought up, hey, let's partner up on this. So and it's been really great.
Great idea.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to brass players the brass these unusual brass players.
You find out stuff that you never would have
exactly,
found out.
And that's honestly what I like doing. Almost as much as I like playing the trombone.
Cool.
So you mentioned earlier up near the beginning a couple groups that you've been recording with, the Odd Couple Quintet and the 9 Live, right?
Right.
9 Live.
Exactly.
So what does that kind of entail?
Right now, the Odd Couple Quintet hasn't done anything in a little while. 9 Live did a few gigs in the fall, and there's nothing coming up right now. I'm just, freelancing, doing this and that, trying to finish this record. Also doing occasional Monday nights with the Mingus Orchestra at the Jazz Standard. It's one of my favorite things to do because I don't have to prepare anything. I just have to show up and play music that it's challenging. Mm-hmm. It's very challenging, but at least I know what's going on, and I don't have to get PDFs at home. But
you've been playing with them for
quite a few years.
For a while.
Yeah. In fact, that's how I met Michael Rabinowitz, who's the bassoonist with the Odd Couple Quintet. That's why it's called the Odd Couple, bassoon and horn. But specifically about the thing at Spectrum, I've been to Spectrum, and I've been to played there and attended different things there. And I know that the piano is fabulous. Okay, it's allegedly one of the best pianos anywhere in New York, which is saying a lot. Mm-hmm. So it occurred to me to use Ruben Salles, who's a Brazilian pianist that I've been doing some gigs with for a couple of years now. And I love his music. It's very, very original, very, very unique. And so I didn't want to bring his whole band. It's too much of a production, but we'll do some duo stuff. Maybe he'll play some solo stuff. I'll play some solo stuff. We'll play some of my music, some of his music, and just rap like we're doing right now.
Excuse me. So, the concert at Spectrum is on February 7th.
Sunday, right?
It's a Sunday, yes. Yeah. That is Spectrum, which is at 121 Ludlow Street, number 2.
Upstairs.
Second floor. I have that. I don't even have to look that up anymore. That's nice for me. But, so, John Clark, Ruben Salas, playing musics. John, thank you so much for meeting up with me. This has been really great, and I look forward to the concert.
Total treat for me. Thank you.